Beautiful Anonymous changes each week. It defies genres and expectations. For example, our most recent episode, I talked to a woman who survived a murder attempt by her own son. But just the week before that, we just talked the whole time about Star Trek. We've had other recent episodes about sexting in languages that are not your first language, or what it's like to get weight loss surgery. It's unpredictable, it's real, it's honest, it's raw. Get Beautiful Anonymous wherever you listen to podcasts.
As all modern brewers are very well aware, barley malt is the primary source of fermentable sugar in beer, while other grains tend to play more of a supporting role. Whereas some of these non-barley grains contribute little more than flavor and color, others are capable of contributing their own fermentables while also adding other positive characteristics. At least that's what many believe. You're listening to the Brülosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me on this episode to discuss the impact of replacing a portion of barley malt with wheat malt, particularly in a British golden ale, is contributor Steve Thanos.
Hey, Marshall. It's good to be with you today. Talking about the old British ale that I love so much. Ironically enough, this beer that I made was actually like heavily inspired by our former Brülosophy contributor, Matt Delfiaco, who told me years ago about his love for the style, and it just got really into my head about, ingredients and whatnot. So that's how this whole thing morphed into what became a really good beer for me. We'll talk more about that later. And even the name of it kind of pays homage to Matt. Can't Shake It, which is the beer that I called this beer. And the name I called this beer, just because, Matt lives on with all of us in Brülosophy. So it's been a while since I talked to Matt. So I'm looking forward to talking about this.
Yeah, and I love British Golden Ale as well, but it's, we'll talk a little bit more about the style in a bit, but one thing that I think is easy to mistake is the fact that British Golden Ale is a relatively modern style. It's not one of the old classic milds, that or bitters that England is known for. It's relatively new, and for that reason, you could use whatever you want in any style, I suppose, but it's okay. It's recommended even to add a little bit of wheat malt to it to improve certain aspects of it. Again, we'll get into that a bit later. It wasn't long at all after I started brewing, actually, that I learned from the guy at my local homebrew shop that the use of a relatively small amount of wheat in pretty much any style could be beneficial. And for that reason, I immediately began using anywhere from 5 to 10% wheat malt in pretty much every batch I brewed. But was it really having the intended impact? Well, that's precisely what you aim to figure out in a recent experiment, Steve. We're going to be talking about that one in a bit. All right, if you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for your support, please consider becoming a patron of Brülosophy over at patreon.com/Brülosophy, where you make a small monthly pledge and receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. If you'd like to be a part of these sessions, all you have to do is make a pledge of $3 or more at patreon.com/Brülosophy. And for just a few bucks more, you'll qualify for more curated rewards like monthly hangouts with the Brülosophy contributors and regular private consultation on whatever it is you want to consult about. Learn more about all of the rewards we offer for your support over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. And just as an aside, huge thanks to all of the people who have been supporting us on Patreon, and especially the ones who have made that decision over the last couple of months. I know that from the outside looking in, it may not seem like a big deal, but boy, do we need it, particularly in the times that we are when it comes to craft beer and homebrewing. You guys are what keeps us around, so we appreciate it immensely. Also, if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we'd appreciate that as well. By doing so, those who have yet to hear of us can more easily find the show. Plus, we really do appreciate knowing what you all think about how we're doing. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who offer brewers various options for high-quality, reasonably priced electric brewing rigs in various voltages and sizes. I've used their 120-volt system for 5-gallon batches, as well as their 240-volt system for 10-gallon batches. Both are awesome. Clawhammer Supply really does put the effort into ensuring their systems do exactly as they are intended to do in as efficient a way as possible. And if you're not ready to make the jump to electric just yet, they also sell 10 and 20-gallon brew-in-a-bag homebrewing starter kits. Whatever it is you're looking for, do yourself a favor and visit clawhammersupply.com. We're confident you're going to love their stuff just as much as we do. All right, listener Scott Housel hit us up after listening to our recent experience episode focused on brewing different batch sizes. Scott said, "Thank you for another wonderful year of entertainment and education. Please continue the experience discussions. I especially enjoyed the batch sizes one." Well, thank you, Scott. We enjoy the experience episodes as well and have no plans to put them to a halt. So he goes on to say, "I love brewing a variety of batch sizes. I'm currently fermenting in kegs, so using my grain father, I can make 7-ish gallons of wort, that's around 27 liters, and split it into 3-gallon batches, 2 3-gallon batches. I made a cold IPA and a Saison from the same wort. I like spunding, so to build natural CO2, so I'm not concerned with only 3 gallons in a 5-gallon keg. I've done several party guile inspired methods. You can add honey, fruit, and or sugar to the smaller beer if you want. Blending is always a possibility too. The trickiest part can be the planning. I use my brewing software to figure out the whole batch, then a separate recipe for each part. I try to keep goals in the center of the range for things like ABV, IBU, etc., and try not to get too hung up on hitting my exact predicted numbers." I mean, I think Scott listed some of the coolest aspects of brewing different batch sizes, Steve, or even just being creative with the process so you can turn a single brew day into different beers. Really cool stuff, Scott. What do you think?
I absolutely love this comment that Scott is making. It actually reminds me of a good friend of mine, Mike, who is constantly hitting me up with messages about different ideas that he comes up with his buddies and brewing beer, and they're always doing split batches, what he calls it, and coming up with different concoctions. I think it's, as we will discuss later on, not being limited by what the quote unquote experts say. And we by no means are experts in all of this, but we have the experience of, being crazy enough to try these experiments out. Right. And we talk endlessly about, what if we did this? What if we did that? And my buddy Mike is doing the same exact thing. And it sounds like that's what Scott's doing too, which I think is what draws me to homebrewing so much. And it's what makes me get really giddy and happy about homebrewing and hearing people talk about it and getting excited, because that's exactly what this hobby's all about, I think. So keep doing it, man. I love it.
Totally. And I love variety. It's weird when I think back, you've all heard about how I've been unable to brew currently due to moving into a new house and not yet having my brewery set up. Following that move, I'm definitely getting closer. We had our big trash pickup, so the garage that will soon become my brewery. Yeah, we're getting there. I have to book an electrician, and I have to figure out exactly what I want before I do the build out. So I'm still in the planning phases, but in a weird way, it's almost as exciting, as it was the first time I built out my garage, because I get to start over. And so doing that, knowing what I know now, but regardless, I love variety. And I think back to the hundreds. I've brewed well over 500 batches of beer, right? And I think back to the number of 5 and 10 gallon batches of the same exact style that I've brewed. Yeah, I get it. We were brewing a lot for experiments and stuff like that, so they have to be the same. But there were other times I'm looking and going, why didn't I split that wort, add some, steeping grains to one of them, create a completely different style? It just, there's so much that you can do with a single batch. And when we're talking about, making your brew day more efficient, to me, getting 2 different styles out of the same mash is one really easy way to do that. So I'm with you, Scott. I think it's such a rad thing. And I am strongly considering doing something like a modified party guile with my first first couple of batches, in fact, just to get different styles on tap immediately. I still got, neighbors to impress. So hopefully I'm able to get to this sooner than later. But where my eyes are right now is doing like a double IPA, nice, but pulling off the first runnings of wort, doing the second runnings and collecting those. So they're basically still from the same exact grains, and then doing a blend of each of those to reduce the OG of the first one while increasing the OG just a little bit of the second one, hence the modified party guile part, and then adding steeping grains and all of that, and maybe making like a brown ale or something, and then having this double IPA. Either way, You can tell I'm getting excited about this. I'm really, it's been too long since I've been able to brew. And you know, I've still got my fingers in it. I'm still committed. It just moves do that to people. So thank you so much for the feedback, Scott. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brülosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. All right. When we're back from this break, our focus will be on the impact of using wheat malt in beer. Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Xchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brülosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Xchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Xchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to xchillerator.com today.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Back in the olden days of brewing, it's safe to presume options for grain were quite limited. Well, such is certainly not the case these days, which has given modern brewers the ability to brew beers with a seemingly endless range of color, aroma, and flavor. Well, one cereal grain that has stood the test of time is wheat. In fact, in my research for this episode, I found that one of the earliest grains used to make beer was probably wheat. There's some evidence that it was being used in Mesopotamia some 8,000 years ago, which is, you think about how long ago that is wild to me. In fact, there's some speculation that the very first fermented grain beverage was wheat. I don't know about you, Steve, but when I've like looked into the history of beer, it always seems to start with this tale of, you know, somebody out in the fields, usually a woman, harvesting the yeast, putting it in a big clay pot, and then it starts raining and they set the clay pot down. And so she goes, you know, away and leaves that out there, and then it sprouts, and then some other stuff happens. And the next thing you know, voila, you've got this beer. Well, that grain apparently was most likely wheat, which I think is pretty fascinating.
I always get really geeky with the whole history of beer. I spent about 2 years writing for another blog prior to coming on with Brülosophy, and I spent a lot of time talking about the history of beers and each style specifically. And while I was doing that, I kind of realized that there's so much fascinating information out there about each style, and some of it overlapped, you know, and even from different country to different country kind of overlapped a little bit. And just realizing that history of beer really kind of sets the foundation for what we do now as homebrewers. So whenever people start talking about history of beer, my ears perk up and I get really excited about it, because it's like, yeah, hell yeah, this is fun. This is why I do like what Scott was talking about earlier with the feedback, and start experimenting and playing around with things, because you have the foundation and that firm base and understanding of like where you are with the beer. So yeah, beer history is fun stuff for me.
Well, you're in luck, because I've got a little bit more wheat history here for you. So we're talking right now, you know, 8,000 years ago, Mesopotamia, which I believe is modern day Iraq. So you think about these people in that kind of desert environment, figuring out ways to use this cereal grain that, otherwise was being used for breads and such, to create these drinks. And the fact that there is some sort of a line between what they were sipping on and what we're sipping on today is just awesome to me. Well, just a mere 800-ish years ago, sometime in the late 12th or early 13th century, Weiss beer, which is made with a good portion of wheat, was becoming viewed as this sort of noble drink. Now, so by noble drink, what I mean is it tended to be reserved for like Bavarian royalty, but we've all had Weiss beer. It is a very characterful wheat-based type of beer. Now, Weiss stands for white, which I believe is a reference to the color of the beer, which is hugely, influenced by the use of a heavy amount of wheat. Well, this had some influence on perceptions of using wheat in beer overall. And while barley still reigns supreme these days, most modern brewers are producing certain beers using varying amounts of wheat. I know commercial brewers who are using anywhere from 5 to 15 to 20% of wheat in beers that you wouldn't otherwise expect there to be wheat in. So not a Hefeweizen or Weiss beer, not a wit beer. These are like your standard American crispy, pale lagers even, or your pale ales and stuff like that. And they throw in a little bit of wheat because they really do believe that it's contributing something of substance to it, which I think is pretty fascinating. Now we're going to break down some of the differences. I don't want to get too nerdy here between barley and wheat, because I do feel like understanding bits of that can help us to even better understand why we might use or employ the use of wheat in beers as an adjunct, more or less, not necessarily as the base grain. So one of the first things is protein content. Barley malt tends to have anywhere from about 9 to 12% protein malt, whereas wheat malt has a range of about 11 all the way up to 16% malt or protein. You think about that. What does protein do to beer? Well, the first thing it can do is increase the body and perceived mouthfeel of a beer. When you hear, using wheat, when you hear of a wheat beer, Steve, and think of mouthfeel, what are you thinking in your mind, the contribution that wheat makes to mouthfeel? I'm
just thinking that it's going to be a very smooth beer that will have a mouthfeel that is kind of all encompassing on your palate. One that isn't very sharp, but more creamy, and just very appealing to your senses and your sense of taste. Even though I don't typically love wheat beers, I still can appreciate the nuances that wheat offers.
Yeah, I do love wheat beers when they're fermented, particularly, I guess, when they're fermented with clean, American yeast strains. So like an American Hefeweizen, you make a nice, simple American Hefeweizen with 30 to 40% wheat malt, the rest Pilsner malt, and toss in some Cascade hops, just real, light on the hopping. And I'm telling you, it is one of the more refreshing things I've ever brewed, and it's insanely easy to make. But yeah, I think when most people think of using wheat malt as a sort of adjunct or like a specialty grain as opposed to a base malt, part of what they're looking for is that contribution to mouthfeel, that kind of fluffy, cloudy, smooth, creamy mouthfeel, as well as the impact that it can have on foam quality or head retention. Now, obviously, because of the protein content, you also run the risk of, I say run the risk because I like clear beer, but of having a more difficult to remove protein haze in the finished beer. I would contend that one of the first things that we learned about hazy IPA, as it was kind of climbing the charts in popularity, was that a lot of the brewers who were making excellent versions of that style are using a rather large portion of something like wheat malt, or wheat in some form or another, which we'll talk about here in a minute. And that is contributing to that haze. It's not just lazy brewing or whatever. But this is more, just as a kind of an aside, that's more of an issue with unmalted wheat. And our focus on this episode is the malted wheat. One of the key characteristics of wheat malt is, as compared to barley malt, is that it's huskless. Barley malt has that nice husk, which we all know during the mash helps to assist with lautering. Well, if you're making a really heavily wheated beer and during the mash you're unable to run off, it's likely due to the fact that there's no husk there, so that the filtration tends to slow down. Have you ever had a stuck mash? I know that you're primarily brewing a bag, but have you ever had a stuck mash of doing another approach because of a heavy use of wheat malt?
My second and final all grain non-Brunebag brewing session was done in my kitchen. It was a red Belgian ale. The beer turned out fairly decent, but I had a terrible stuck sparge, and it was a pain to lauter that beer. And after that, I took the beer to my homebrew club. We talked about it, and I was introduced to the Brunebag, and ever since then, I have been a non-stuck sparge happy homebrewer, and I loved every minute of it because, everybody talks about, stuck sparge and like Brunebag. What's the solution? Brunebag, and it becomes so repetitive, but it's like, but it works. As everyone knows, I love rye beers. Rye is another ingredient that will play havoc on your sparge, because it gets really gummy after a while, especially with the amount that I'm using. And I'm using the Brunebag, and it's like I have no issues with this at all. Tip of the cap to Brunebag and what they're doing for us homebrewers these days.
Yeah, man. Thanks to those Aussies down under
Definitely.
who introduced us to that. This is a complete aside here, but it's pretty cool that you're looking at all these all-in-one systems, and they are relying, in essence, on that theory.
Oh, sure.
The Brunebag theory
definitely.
of removing grains from wort as opposed to the other way. Pretty cool stuff, but I agree. Using certain methods, you can avoid the stuck sparge. I have told the story about my my stuck sparge with the heavily rye beer that I made.
Mm-hmm.
After that, I used Brunebag for any time I was using a non-husked grain, and so I have not had a stuck sparge with wheat. But I did make a wheat beer one time using the batch sparge method, and it took almost double the time to collect the sweet wort.
Yeah.
I knew what it was. I knew what I was getting into. But that's just something to keep in mind. You can use rice husks, to combat that. So not a huge deal in terms of the flavor profile. Barley malt is described as having more of a distinct malty sweet flavor compared to wheat malt, which has been described as having more of a bready and even slightly tart character to it. Some even use the word like kind of light citrus to describe the flavor of heavily wheated beers. I don't disagree with that. I've always gotten kind of I don't know if I'd go fully into tart necessarily, because I think it's a kind of a loaded word when it comes to beer especially, but definitely kind of a sharper crispness that I rather enjoy, and that I feel like really can be play into certain hop varieties quite well.
Definitely. It's somewhere in the background. It doesn't take center stage at all on my palate.
Right.
But yeah, it's somewhere there. And I've actually heard people just as recent as doing an experiment a couple weeks ago talking about that like slight tartness to it. And, who knows where exactly that came from with that particular beer. But it's interesting to hear that kind of feedback.
Yeah. You think about making like an American wheat beer with that already has that kind of wheated, tartness, I suppose. But then you use a hop like Motueka, which is known for having a real strong lime characteristic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just like a beautifully refreshing style of beer that has no adjuncts, nothing, it's just beer, but you can really kind of play around with that thing. I think it's pretty cool. Again, compared to barley malt, wheat malt's going to have a fairly similar color contribution. One thing that is different is the diastatic power. That's just referring to the enzyme activity that converts starches to sugars during the mash. Whereas barley malt, it falls anywhere from, like 140 to 160 degrees Lovibond. Wheat malt will usually be around 60 to 90 degrees Lovibond. This is more than enough for self-conversion. You can, ostensibly you can make a 100% wheat malt beer. I know people who have done it. It's kind of odd because it does have a little bit more beta glucan, kind of like rye malt does. So you can get kind of a snotty, viscous mouthfeel to it. if that floats your boat, by all means. The issue is that it may not convert as much or as readily. They do say that around 50 degrees Lovibond is kind of the cutoff for conversion in a standard mash. So, wheat malt is great. It's going to work for that. Barley malt's just a bit stronger. So things to keep in mind, you might expect to see maybe a slightly lower OG pound for pound, using either barley malt versus wheat malt. So one other thing of note that I think is interesting, and I know for this experiment we're going to talk about in the next segment that you used a red wheat malt, and then you'll notice when you go to a homebrew shop, they also have white wheat malt. My understanding of those is that red wheat, I believe, is a winter wheat, white wheat is a spring wheat, and so they basically do the same thing. I have not done, or we at Brülosophy have not done a formal experiment, and I haven't even done like side by sides in my own brewing. I would be interested to compare red and white wheats in beers, because some people swear that there's a slight difference in the beers that I've tasted over time. I have recipes where I've used both at different times, just depending on what's available or what's cheapest, and I can't really tell a difference. So I don't think that's a huge component to you're going to buy whatever is available. But I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, or have you experienced anything different with that?
This actually makes me think I was thinking about this earlier when you were talking about your own anecdotal experiences with using wheat, and it makes me think of the beer that I brewed several years ago as a beginning home brewer, and I named it Hops Over Vienna, and it was a very easy grist. It was half Vienna malt and half wheat, and heavily hopped with Amarillo, and then like an 05 yeast just gives it a really bright, fruity characteristic. I think I need to do that again and maybe dial down the hops a little bit so that we're not, overwhelmed with the hops. But maybe I'll do multiple batches of it and just kind of play around with it, and really kind of test out the white and wheat malt idea. I think that'd be really fascinating.
Yeah, that is ripe for the picking, because it's such an easy experiment. Just get two different sets of grain, maybe even go like 50-50 Pilsner malt, and then either white or red wheat.
Yeah.
But I'd be fascinated. My understanding is that the flavor difference and what it contributes to the beer overall is more or less identical. Now, we'll flesh that out in a future experiment, hopefully. But all right, so again, diastatic power is probably the biggest difference that you're going to notice, besides wheat malt being huskless, whereas barley malt has a husk. So there are various forms in which wheat comes in. We've been talking about wheat malt. That is one of them. But you can also buy flaked oats, very, very common in brewing. Every homebrew shop is going to carry these. Flaked oats are commonly used in styles like porter and stout to impart a nice kind of creamy mouthfeel and that nice rich cap of foam. They're not malted, so the flaking process takes unmalted oats that are steamed and then rolled between these really big flat rollers to create these flakes. That process gelatinizes the starches, making them readily available without the need for a cereal mash. So you are going to get some specific gravity increase out of using flaked oats, but I think more brewers are using it for the kind of downstream effects, that mouthfeel, body, and foam. Another form you can get oats in is called torrefied. Not terribly different than flaked oats. What is different is the temperature at which they're cooked. So torrefied oats take husked oat grains, so with the husk still on it, cook them at a really high temperature. That gelatinizes the starchy endosperm, just like with the flaking process, and then it's flaked. So no cereal mash is needed, and the husk can help with lautering. I'm not sure what the purported differences between flaked and torrefied oats are as it pertains to using them in beer. What I've heard is that torrefied oats even can emphasize those other characteristics even more. It will contribute even more, increase to body and mouthfeel and stuff like that. Again, we haven't tested it out. We can do that in the future. Finally, there's malted oats. If you think about malted oats as just the oat equivalent to barley, you'd be right on point. Oats undergo the same malting process as barley, leading to activation of enzymes that allow for the conversion of starches into fermentable sugars during the mash. This is widely said to contribute, again, to that creamy, kind of fuller texture to the beer, as well as a smooth mouthfeel. All things that, in my opinion, fit within most styles of beer. This is the reason that I opted. I mean, I bought a 55-pound sack, I think, of Continental wheat malt, and I had that sack around for well over a year because I was just taking, a pound or two out at a time per batch, and that's 55 or so batches, just for these purposes. The purpose of improving mouthfeel, getting good foam quality, all of that stuff. Now let's talk a little bit about a style that I feel like it could be helpful in, which is British Golden Ale. You're a fan of the style, right, Steve?
Oh yes, definitely. Thanks to Matt Delfiaco, as I mentioned earlier, and it is a style that is so. It works so well during the summer months when it's really hot here in the Midwest and out by you. And it's just easy drinking, and nothing gets better than that.
Yeah, my understanding about the history of British Golden Ale is that it was sort of a response to the rising popularity of certain types of beer styles over here in the States. And so sometime in the 80s, maybe, I could be off on this, but brewers over in the UK were like, well, let's do something that's kind of sticks to our roots while also being an adaptation of what we're seeing over there. Mm-hmm. And I think it hits hard. It's such a delicious beer. It's simple. It's clean. They can be somewhat hoppy, actually. And you can use whatever variety of hops you want in there. The BJCP provides this description of British Golden Ale: a hop-forward, average strength to moderately strong, pale bitter. Drinkability and refreshing quality are critical components of the style, as it was initially a summer seasonal beer. I can drink this in the middle of winter. I don't care. It's that delicious.
For sure.
And I tend to like using, classic British yeasts when I'm making a British Golden Ale. You kind of get that cool hybridization of like an American pale ale versus alongside kind of a British bitter. Delicious. Yep. Also, though, something to note is the BJCP says that brewers can, quote, use sugar adjuncts, corn, or wheat in British Golden Ale, likely to assist with body and foam quality. I think that's pretty rad.
Yeah, and that's what really drew me to this experiment, I think, because of that level of ambiguity and interpretation that the BJCP kind of allowed for that interpretation, and just like, okay, let's just run with it. Let's play around with what can we do? What advantages can we give other homebrewers to look forward to, right? And to say, oh yeah, I got, this, like you said, 55-pound sack of wheat malt, red wheat, white wheat, whatever you have, and let's use it up. Let's go outside of the norm, and let's stop using it just for porters or stouts and whatnot. But let's use it for other things. And I think it works really well. While we're talking about ingredients, I'm wondering now, thinking out loud, like, is this where the whole idea of the hops that we use, because there's a huge understanding that people accept Cascade hops as like the norm for a British Golden Ale, and I'm all for it. I mean, I love Cascade. It's a wonderful hop that I will always have on hand. So I'm wondering if that's where it's coming from. I don't know, but I'm for it, and I like it.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I've noticed that as well. I've never heard it like said by some BGA pro by any means, but you look at recipes online, and a good portion of them are using Cascade or maybe some derivative of Cascade, an Amarillo or something that has that citrusy a characteristic, but still in a British Golden Ale. So it's like they're paying homage to the influence, of the American brewing scene. But you think about what is Cascade. If my understanding is correct, it's a daughter of Fuggles.
Exactly.
So, Cascade has that grapefruity thing that we all love, but it also has some really neat, kind of throwback old school flavors that we would maybe associate with a British ale in the first place. So, like I mentioned earlier, I was pretty quick to adopt the trope about wheat being a surefire way to achieve good mouthfeel and head retention in my beers. In fact, I used it so often, like I said earlier, that I purchased a 55-pound sack of the stuff and worked my way through it over the course of about 15 months. Was it really having this expected effect? That's exactly what you aim to test out in a recent experiment, Steve. Results from that when we're back from this break.
We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brülosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. When I started buying ingredients in bulk, I had space to store 4 different base malts, and I made sure to reserve one of my larger containers, those 60-pound Vittles vaults, for wheat malt for a while, even though I was usually using less than 2 pounds in a typical 5-gallon or 19-liter batch. Was it worth having that much wheat malt around for the purposes that I was using it for? Steve, you performed an experiment to see for yourself.
I certainly did, and it was a fun experiment. I did 2 5-gallon batches of a British Golden Ale. In the grist that I used, it was 67% Maris Otter and 33% of wheat malt. Looking at it now, it seems like, there's a little bit of distance from this experiment. It's a lot of wheat malt, but
I love it.
I still like the beer. So it kind of makes me think that maybe for my own palate, my own liking, I do proclaim that I'm not a big wheat beer fan. I think if it's mixed with enough grain that's weediness, if I'll call it that, kind of dissipates. Even notice it in my own recipe of hops over Vienna, where the hops kind of took over that weediness, quote unquote, and made it a very drinkable beer. So yeah, maybe I'm more of a fan of wheat than I thought. I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you, when we're designing experiments, we're usually doing the best we can to lean into the variable. We really want to test it out. Right. So this was 2 5-gallon batches. Again, one of them had 33% wheat malt, just to clarify. The other one was 100% Maris Otter, same weights. So we were replacing 33% of the Maris Otter with this red wheat malt. Now, you think about what are some of the concerns one might have with making a single malt beer, something like a British Golden Ale. Well, the style is intended to be crisp and refreshing, but you still want character there. You still want it to feel good in your mouth and to have those qualities and have a nice cap of foam. Well, one way to do that is to use wheat malt. And you start wondering, it's natural to assume, well, the more you use, the better. So 33% is obviously, that's 13% higher than the kind of modern recommendations for the purposes that we're using it for, at least. Is it a wheat beer at this point? No, it's a highly wheated British Golden Ale still, so it makes sense why you'd still like it. But I remember chatting with you about this and settling on that 33%. And I feel like it's a really good way to test out the impact of wheat malt in a style. So simple.
For sure. For sure. And I think it'll be something that I'll play around with in maybe a future experiment with testing out some wheat malt. So yeah, it's definitely possible.
So let's get into your brewing process. This isn't going to be a terribly difficult beer. I'm on the record as saying that I think British brewing is some of the most forgiving. It's far different, a far cry from the German lager brewing and all of the convoluted steps that they created to make these delicious lager beers. The Brits were doing it, what feels like homebrewers, like starting a professional brewery and just doing it as easy as possible. But tell us about your brew day.
Two identical volumes of water that I collected, adjusted both the same mineral profile, mashed at 153 Fahrenheit. That is 67 Celsius for 60 minutes. This was not a short and shoddy brew day at all. And when the mashes were completed, I removed my grains from my brew bag and proceeded to boil the wort for 60 minutes as well. And then I went back to the old classics of Cascade as my hop. I had 28 grams at 60 minutes as my bittering, which is one of the things I love about Cascade. You can use it as a dual hop that you can use throughout your entire brew day. It's awesome. Went a little bit less with my 30-minute edition with 14 grams, and then kind of bumped it up again at my 15 and 5-minute editions with 28 grams. So you definitely taste the Cascade hops, the fruitiness, and it was just a great, I think, way to kind of represent the Cascade hops. After the boil, I chilled them and went down to, I went over to check out my original gravity, and for both, I hit a original gravity of 1.049, which was ideal, I think, for me in what I wanted to get out of this beer. Something very light, something not too heavy. I know it's going to have the body, either just with the Maris Otter batch or with the Maris Otter and wheat. So I wasn't really worrying about, oh, this is too thin, this is not enough, because it really is, it just hit the right profile that I really wanted.
Yeah. 1049 is lower than what you're going to find in the BJCP. Reminder, BJCP guidelines, we can do whatever we want, but I like that you went with a little bit less of a smaller grain bill than usual for this anyways, because in a way, we're looking to see, will this, with this, it's commonly accepted that lower alcohol beers are going to be thinner. And so will the use of this high amount of wheat, 33% wheat malt, will it contribute that kind of unctuousness, that viscosity that's going to make it taste like a bigger beer while still being lower in ABV? I think that's an awesome way of testing it, because one would expect the all Maris Otter malt beer at 1049, which is not a small beer by any means, but to be maybe a little bit thinner.
Right.
I would have expected for sure for the 33% wheat malt to contribute, at least increased viscosity and that kind of creamier mouthfeel. So I'm all good with the 1049. And just to go back to the Cascade, your hopping regime on this is beautiful. That, British Golden Ale is not a lowly hopped beer.
Right.
So that is not a crazy, hop amount. So I'm looking at this. The reason I bring this up is because we will often get, regardless of what the results are, we'll often get comments from people saying, well, your hopping regime, maybe that got in the way of the variable being perceptible. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but if that's why we qualify every experiment with the style of beer that we're doing the testing the variable on. And British Golden Ale, this is a very simple, single hop beer. The one without the wheat malt was a smash beer, single malt and single hop
exactly.
beer. So we're going simple for the sake of keeping whatever impact that variable has kind of on the forefront. So anyways, just great design. I wish I could drink that beer right now.
Me too.
And it only gets better because I love the yeast you used for this one.
Yeah. So speaking of yeast, see, you're good with segues, Marshall. Give yourself credit. It was a single pouch of Imperial's A09 Pub. Went into each of the batches of wort. I fermented this bad boy at 66 Fahrenheit. That is 19 Celsius. And after activity was absent after a week, I took a hydrometer measurement and showing no difference in the final gravity, which was a mere 1.008 for both batches. It's pretty low. Typically I get on average, I would say probably 1.010 or 12. So this one, I really liked how it went down a little bit more. Again, from what I can remember in this beer, it was quite tasty. And I'll get to a little bit of other information about this beer a little bit later.
Well, I want to comment on the OG and FG being identical for both. We talked a little bit in the last segment about the difference in diastatic power between wheat malt and barley malt. just my own thinking about it, I would have expected on some level for the beer made with 33% wheat malt to, maybe come in a point or two lower at the very least than the one made with barley malt. Mm-hmm. That was not the case. They started at the same OG, and then lo and behold, when we're looking at FG, they finished the same as well. So from kind of a numbers or an objective perspective, these beers, the only thing that's different about these beers at this point is going to be the potential flavor, aroma, mouthfeel, and foam quality differences that would be imparted by the wheat malt. The color of the wheat that you used is right about the same as the color of the Maris Otter, maybe a little bit lighter in color than the Maris Otter, but not a huge difference. So I'm not, I'm looking at the FG pictures right now, and those look identical. Right. I mean, they look the same to me. So very interesting to me as a kind of a first measure before we get into the, sensory analysis piece of it, that objectively that there's just no difference numbers wise. That was not expected by me, at least. Right.
And I like the idea of kind of going back to our talk about the hops, and still kind of relates to this now, making experiments for homebrewers that are usable, right? Like I like the idea of having it so that you can just take that recipe and you can plug it into your software and just brew it, right? And not be worrying about other factors, and making these experiments plausible, relatable, and doable for homebrewers. So it works. I absolutely love this beer, and the numbers came out for me, so I was happy.
Yeah, good stuff there. So these beers are done fermenting now, and you transfer them into CO2 purge kegs, as we always do. You put them on gas in your keezer. You left them for a couple of weeks to condition. So, after 2 weeks in this keezer on gas, they're nicely carbonated. I'm looking at the photo of the beers right now. Interestingly, they both look to have a slight haze to them. I know that you can tell that part of that is condensation on the glasses. That's just kind of a difficult thing to account for.
Sure.
But they have a slight haze. I would have expected the beer made with wheat malt to be way hazier than the one made with all Maris Otter. That doesn't seem to be the case. And in terms of, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, you saw these in real life, Steve. I'm only seeing the photo. They both look to be the same color. They both look to have the same color and size of foam. The foam appears to have decent retention. There's a nice, 1/8 of an inch cap of foam on a nice full glass of beer. I would describe the color as like a slightly orange hue with, they don't look that different.
No.
That again, I'm going, well, I would have expected something different at least,
right. Yeah, no, exactly. And at least with like maybe a little bit with color, maybe with like head retention and whatnot. But yeah, these beers were pretty identical. So I really didn't see any difference too much.
I'm not seeing much of a difference now, but could people taste a difference? Well, let's get to you first. You did your own set of 5 personal triangle tests. We call these semi-blind triangle tests because we do know what the variable is, but people were interested to see how our abilities as kind of biased brewers of these beers, they were interested to see how our performance would be on a triangle test. And so that's why we do these. I say it all the time. I'm not the biggest fan of it, but for what it's worth, people find it interesting. Tell us about your performance on your own set of 5 triangle tests.
So when I did my triangle test for this beer, I got 3 out of 5. And I kind of contributed that as just lucky guesses. Like I've been saying all along, these 2 beers were really identical, both good examples of the style. So much so that I entered the red wheat version of the beer into a homebrew contest in September of the year that I brewed this, and I won first place for the category that it was in, and it was actually considered in the best of show round for the competition. And I actually that was the second beer that I had in the best of show that year. So that was something that I kind of look towards with this beer as being, like one of the higher points, and kind of gives it some street cred, if you will, right?
Yeah.
And I will definitely be brewing this again. Yeah.
I'm starting to think, what if I figure out a way to make turn A? I was talking in the first segment on feedback about, doing like a split batch from single mash. I'm thinking now I could probably get away with an American Hefeweizen and then a British Golden Ale, just because of the wheat use, and that just sounds awesome to me. This beer sounds so good. The Maris Otter, oh my goodness gracious. I love Maris Otter in general, but I like how you're willing to admit that even 3 out of 5, which on the surface you're like, hey, that's not bad. Those aren't bad odds. You said, no, those were lucky guesses. And that's a good point, because randomness is random for a reason. There are going to be times where lucky guessing just leads to a false positive, where, you get all 5 right. I mean, you do it more than enough times, you're going to eventually land on all 5 being right that were just random guesses. That doesn't speak to the actual difference between the beer. And that is a good reason why we serve these to blind participants. In this case, you served the beers to 20 participants, had no idea what the variable was. I'm not sure. We don't have a rule against telling about the style or anything like that, but who knows? Maybe the tasters didn't even know the style. Out of those 20 participants, 11 would have been expected to identify the unique sample in order for us to say with some level of confidence that there seems to be a real difference between these beers. And then we can kind of point to the one big difference, which is the use of 33% wheat malt in one of them. In the end, how many out of the 20 actually got their pick right on the triangle tests?
Only 6 people, which is 30%, which leads us to a not significant result. Tasters could not reliably tell the difference with these beers. So it kind of gave me some indications that I wasn't too far off with my lucky guesses, quote unquote, and justifiably so. I think I was looking at the bigger picture later on when I won the gold medal for that beer. And that was a little bit more important to me, I guess, at the time. So yeah, this beer, it rocks. I love it. It will be brewed again. I'm getting a hankering for it right now, actually, as we've been discussing this and have said already. So I will be in the garage soon, I think.
I'm going to get back to that because I have a question for you about it. But I want to just lay this out there. 20 participants. You've got 3 cups in front of you. Mm-hmm. The expectation there, if the beers are identical, would be that 1/3 would pick in a random sampling. 1/3 would pick each cup because they're all the same. This is exactly what happened in this. Now, obviously, these beers are not identical, but on a perceptible level, this data seems to suggest that they're not different enough for most tasters to be able to tell them apart. That, in and of itself, the fact that people are so married to this idea of wheat malt having a notable impact on certain characteristics in their beer, this is a wild one to me. There was no perceived tartness in the wheat malt beer. It's not any hazier, by my sight at least, than the all Maris Otter beer. The mouthfeel ostensibly was identical or the same. The foam looks exactly the same in both of them. This just throws in the face of the wheat malt advocates out there that maybe it's not doing what we all think it's supposed to be doing. And I mean, I'll be the first to admit, when we designed this experiment together, I was fully convinced at 33% we were going to find a difference.
Oh yeah.
And we didn't.
Right.
And that is just wild to me, that these beers made with different, base grains are basically perceptibly the same. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, what kind of implications do you come to you from this? This is wild.
I kind of think about all of and this kind of harkens back to even like the before when I started with Brülosophy, and just thinking about it as a young home brewer, thinking like, oh, these guys are doing all these experiments and they're testing things out. And, what does that say about the implications about home brewing and the quote unquote experts and whatnot? And more and more I think about it, even now as a contributor for the last almost 6 years. It's been crazy that's how long it's been almost for me. But that like Brülosophy doesn't sit here and say, yes, we know everything and that we are, definitively right about everything. I will be the first person to admit to homebrewers, to my students in my classroom, that I do not know everything. And I'm very comfortable with saying that. And I think what we do at Brülosophy, I think we do it damn well, is we offer up opportunities for people to experiment with things and to see, hey, in a crunch, when I don't have the certain ingredients that the quote unquote experts say online on the interwebs, saying that, you have to use this. Well, you know what? Maybe that's not practical. Maybe that's something that you are interested in and you want to check out. So you just brew it, and you brew it the way you want to do it, which I think is a lot more fun and a lot more of an interesting experience for any home brewer, as opposed to just going with the status quo and not questioning it. At Brülosophy, I think we do a really good job with just, again, offering up opportunities, giving people things to look at, things to think about, and at the end of the day, it's just beer.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, yeah, I think you put that well. And I think one more point that I want to throw in is we're not sitting here like going, oh, we want to prove this wrong.
Exactly.
No, we're just as curious as everyone else. We just have a little bit of insanity and are willing to risk,
now who's sounding humble now?
Yeah.
We have a lot of insanity, but
and we're willing to do the things other brewers don't want to do. And that's all it is. I mean, I get that people want to try to like reveal something crazy about us. There's not much here. We're boring homebrewers,
right? We're geeks.
But I do think, we are geeks to the core, but I do think that the fact that this one came back non-significant, again, there are going to be people who are like, oh, whatever, you guys messed it up on purpose, or yada, yada. I promise you that's not the case. You go on believing what you want to believe. And I'm going to get back to my question for you. You're going to brew a British Golden Ale soon, because inspired by our talk today, it sounds like.
Yes,
so
for sure.
Are you going to use wheat malt, or are you not going to use wheat malt? That's what I'm wondering.
I think if I have it on hand and I want to use it up, sure. If I don't, I'm not going to stress about it. I think that's like my main objective now that I'm with Brülosophy, is that I'm not stressing about the things that I cannot control. And sure, I can go out and buy, a little bit of wheat malt or white malt or whatever I want to buy. It's not going to cost me that much money. That's fine. But if I don't have to, I won't. I know for a fact I have Maris Otter in my garage right now. I can use that. And I have everything else. Or I can order it, and I'm fine with that. So, yeah, I mean, if it's there, great. If it's not, great. It doesn't. I know it's still going to be a good beer, because this experiment proves it that, they're still going to be good. Now, other factors can come into play: temperature control, temp of my mash and everything else, boil overs, whatever. I get it. There's always room for, mistakes to be had. But I think in theory, I think either way, with or without the wheat, can still make a really good beer.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm not going to get into the details. I'm sure we've talked about it on a past episode, but this isn't the first wheat malt experiment that we've done in a similar fashion. There was one that we did a couple years prior to yours, in fact, using a smaller proportion of wheat. And that amount was determined based on what other people were brewing this style of beer that we focused on, hazy IPA, the amount that they were typically using. And that beer, those beers looked a little bit different, but perceptibly indistinguishable by both myself, I'm the one who brewed that, as well as the panel of tasters. So this just adds more, to that kind of growing pile of evidence that maybe our understanding of wheat malt isn't, in terms of its perceptible impact at least, isn't as, certain as at least I once thought it was. And I just think that's fascinating. Now, we did get one reader comment that I want to get to on this one. Jean-Raphael Lavoie says, I was not expecting that result when reading the article. Either was I, Jean-Raphael.
Me either.
It makes me wonder if tasters could identify a wit beer made without wheat. I think I could, but could I? I mean, that is such a good question. And I feel like, when I think of wit beer, I think of yeast character. But I know that it's made with a big portion of wheat malt. Same thing with Weiss beer. You expect that really banana-y kind of isoamyl acetate character. Mm-hmm. But if you made it with something other than wheat malt, would it come out different? I would imagine it would. But man, the results from this experiment leave me scratching my head, wondering, does it even matter? One thing that I have heard to get to kind of the deeper part of Jean-Raphael's question here is that that wheat malt does have more ferulic acid or potential ferulic acid, which is going to interact with those characterful wit beer and Weiss beer type of yeast, also Saison yeast, such that it creates more of that kind of clovey spice character. But I don't know, maybe that's not, our understanding of that's not that clear either.
Right.
What do you think?
I think it's a really great question. And I think that he should definitely do it himself and test it out. And, that's the whole nature of what we're trying to do here at Brülosophy, I think. And, getting people to, break out of the norm and start testing things out yourself. Yeah, sure. We're going to do it because we're geeks and we love to do it. And it's more, information, more data to collect. And yeah, I get geeked when I get on these podcasts because then I start thinking about different possibilities for experiments, right? And it's like, okay, now I can, place an yeast order and I can do what I need to do because this is what's fun to me. So, yeah, definitely test it out, I think. And anybody who's listening, test it out yourself. Because, we're always looking for crazy people like us. Misery loves company.
Misery loves company, though. It's the funnest misery ever. And I'll tell you, I'm not sure if I'm buying wheat malt henceforth, it's going to be for wheat beers. It's not. It's. I've in the same way that I've stopped using carapils for head retention. There's some talk out there that wheat malt actually is foam negative. So the fact that people are using it to contribute to foam quality, I don't know. Again, it's a head scratcher because there's evidence, like actual lab evidence, that wheat malt, in the same way with carapils, is actually foam negative. So it depletes your foam. Fascinating results. This is the reason we do this stuff, is because we like being surprised with the end result of these experiments, and it's just fun. Learning is always fun. So yeah, good stuff here. That does bring us to the end of this episode. Please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Brülosophy Show, at youtube.com/@The Show. That's the @ symbol followed by The Brülosophy Show. You do not need to use the umlaut. If you're listening to this podcast, we're confident you're going to love the videos Martin's creating over at YouTube as well. And as always, you can read more about the experiment we discussed by clicking the link to the article on Brülosophy.com in the description of this episode. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to Brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit Patreon.com/Brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more. Life is good, the likelihood of me.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with AutoQuote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.